Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today I wanted to cover 4 budget-friendly unique items. These are for Trade League. These are probably things that you're going to have a bit of trouble getting yourself in solo self-found, but these are items that are far better than the cost of them would indicate. 3 of the 4 are boss drops, and they're actually pretty uncommon even as boss drops, but the thing that makes them very affordable is that not many people are looking for them. Or in the case of the last one, there are plenty of people looking for them, but they're being very picky with them, and it's quite RNG heavy item. So without further ado, the first one is Viridi's Veil. Viridi's Veil is a unique helmet that drops from the Maven. You can get this from the normal version of the Maven, you can get it from the Uber Maven, and if you get really lucky and get one of the Maven's reliquary keys on the Uber Maven fight, you can also get a mechanically equivalent shiny version of it. Now, this has +2 to the level of socketed gems. It's actually +1 or +2, and if you do get one that's +1 here, you probably want to use the 3-for-1 vendor recipe to try and vendor it up into one that's got +2. So definitely look for one that's got +2 on it. Then it has a big chunk of armor and energy shield. It has some resistances on it, 15 to 25%, depending on how lucky the roll is. Then it's got some interesting mods on it that are quite strong defensively. Damage of enemies hitting you is unlucky while you have a magic ring equipped. Now, having a magic ring equipped is a big cost. This means that instead of having up to 6 mods on your ring, you're going to be capped at 2. You're also not going to be able to have that ring be Kalandra flipped. However, damage of enemies hitting you is unlucky is a really powerful defensive modifier. Then there's an extra benefit depending on which slot you have your magic ring in, and this gives you some flexibility. If you put it on the right ring slot, then you will get hexproof, which is immunity to most curses. And if you put it on the left ring slot, then you will take no additional damage from critical strikes. Now, the left ring slot is probably the default choice, but there are definitely builds that want this on the right ring instead, particularly ones that use the unique armor soul mantle. So there's a lot of ways that you can use this. One thing I would suggest you consider at a low budget is use a curse on hit influenced ring, and you'll probably be able to get yourself an okay secondary mod on it. It'll be hard to get a perfect one. And if you've got a higher budget, there's a few other things you can do. Firstly, you can look for bad base delve fractured rings. So this is rings that have got one of the delve mods that are exclusive to delve fractured onto it. Then you can scour that, which will make it magic. You can then apply alteration orbs and or augmentation orbs in order to get a perfect second mod on it. And then once you've got something that's solid, you can then throw it into the 2 implicit corruption chamber and see what you can come up with. And again, that can get you something truly fantastic that will work really well in conjunction with this powerful helmet. So that's Viridi's Veil, quite common drop from the Maven. I believe it's her second most common drop behind the boots. And also one thing that's really good is that you can usually get the enchant you want on it in a trade league, because lots of people who run a lot of labyrinths will buy a lot of this item and will enchant them. So next we have Asenath's Gentle Touch. Now, this is an item that used to be staggeringly rare. This is a drop anywhere unique. Historically, it was tied to the Legion content, but that has not been the case for some leagues. And it was in the most rare category of unique items, up there with things like Rizlatha's Coil, Doriani's Prototype, and the like. However, this item has been made much more common in 3.19. We don't have any hard numbers on it. I suspect it's dropped from tier 1 rarity to tier 3, but even if it's just dropped to tier 2 rarity, whatever's happened, it's become much cheaper than it used to be. Additionally, there's a divination card for a 2 implicit corrupted version. This is called Gift of Asenath. This used to be a contender for one of the rarest divination cards in the game. It's still not common. I think it's a bit rarer than the Nurse now, but it is certainly no longer 3, 4, 5, 6 times as rare as the Doctor. But because there is that divination card, and because that has been made more common, you can often find Asenath's Gentle Touch with the one exact corruption you want on it, and potentially also with a second one that is useful to your build. As you can see here, the set that I traded for cost me 150 Chaos Orbs, and it has +2 to the level of socketed duration gems, which is genuinely good for my build. Curse enemies with Enfeeble on hit, which is universally good if you've got enough curse limit to use it. And then we've just got the core stats of the item, lots of life, lots of mana, curse with temporal chains on hit, and then the curse explosion effects. Enemies that are killed near corpses affected by your curses explode, dealing 3% of their life as physical damage. Now, 3% may not seem like very much, but that can be scaled via a lot of different means, and that's why these end up being a very powerful set of gloves for augmenting your clear speed. Especially when you kill a big chunky monster, this will tend to take out all of the weaker monsters near it, even without any substantial attempts to scale that. But if you've set up your character so that all your damage ignites, then you can do a lot more with these. Next, we have Impresence, and I'm specifically calling out the Uber version of Impresence. A lot of people didn't realize this because it was added with not much fanfare in 3.18. But where Impresence is an item that's been in the game since 3.1, Uber Impresence now drops from the Uber Duber version of the Elder. So this is when you fight the Uber Elder encounter at level 85. So you set up your Atlas so that the Shaper and the Uber Elder encounters are raised to their maximum tier. Then in that situation, there is a slim chance that you will get an Uber Impresence. The difference between a regular Impresence and an Uber Impresence is that it will have an additional Blasphemy mod on it. So I see here that this specific one I've called out has Conductivity has no reservation if cast as an aura. That would be on the normal version of Impresence, but then it also has a bonus mod. Enfeeble has no reservation if cast as an aura. There are 4 different bonus mods you can get: Punishment, Enfeeble, Temporal Chains, and Elemental Weakness. Broadly speaking, the strongest ones of these Impresences are the ones where the 2 curses have a synergy. So for example, Despair is very commonly used alongside Punishment because both scale damage over time. Despair directly, Punishment somewhat more indirectly, but it does still scale it. Then you have Conductivity is very effective in conjunction with Elemental Weakness. However, something that doesn't really synergize with anything is Enfeeble. Enfeeble is just a very, very good all-around aura, and when you're getting it for free, it starts to become a lot more compelling. And so the next item I want to say as a budget option is an Enfeeble Uber Impresence. So you're going to look for an Impresence that is item level 87 because that's what the Uber versions will be. And then you're going to look for the mod Enfeeble has no reservation if cast as an aura. At the time I'm recording this video, you'll be able to find all 5 of the base versions of Impresence with the extra mod for Enfeeble under a Divine Orb. Now, if you do decide to go with this, you will need to raise your curse limit to 2 somehow. There's a number of ways to do that. And you would probably want to link Awaken Blasphemy to Enfeeble, to Conductivity, and to Enhance. The reason you want Enhance specifically is that quality on curses is great. And whilst normally having Enhance linked to anything that has a reservation is really painful, it doesn't matter here because Enfeeble has no reservation if cast as an aura, and Conductivity has no reservation as cast as an aura. So even though you are raising the reservation cost, that doesn't actually need to be paid. So that's the reason I really like Uber Impresence. It is a very competitive slot at the moment, the Amulet slot, but this is one to consider playing around with, especially if you're not at a point where you can afford the really Uber things like Ashes of the Stars. And finally, we've got Skin of the Lords. Now, Skin of the Lords is an upgraded version of an item that comes from Chayula. The base item is Skin of the Loyal, and then this can be upgraded with a Chayula's Blessing. But that's not the only way to get it, and actually most of these seem to come from the divination card, The Chosen. The Chosen comes from Breach content. It's fairly uncommon, but over at Trade League, a lot of them do drop. Now, this item can be both ordinary and extraordinary. The extraordinary ones are definitely not part of this video because this is about budget uniques, but it is worth knowing that they exist. If you get something like 3 blue, 2 green, 1 red, in conjunction with a high power keystone like Magebane, then you have got something very, very, very valuable there. So let's talk about how this item works. Firstly, it is always 6-link. That's a hidden mod on it. And secondly, when it says sockets can't be modified, that is absolute. You can't use tainted chromatics on this item, and it is always corrupted. The Skin of the Loyal, which is the non-upgraded version, does have this line of text, but you can bypass it there because actions that corrupt the item do allow you to modify socket colors. So for example, Elva's Corruption Chamber can bleach all 6 of the sockets on that item white, or a Vaal Orb can bleach 1 to 6 of them white. However, that corner case doesn't apply to Skin of the Lords. It is an absolute prohibition. You cannot modify them in any way. You get +2 to the level of socketed gems and 100% increased global defenses. Now, the thing that made this item really good, back in 3.16, there were 2 key changes that were made. Firstly, the +1 to the level of socketed gems was raised to +2. That was huge. Secondly, Grace and Determination were changed. Grace and Determination now grant a lot more evasion and a lot more armor, and as a result, getting 100% increased global defenses matters more than it used to. Additionally, both stats were made more powerful on characters. As a result, this is much more powerful defensively than it used to be. It's not a powerhouse defensive piece of gear, but it is a solid one. You will always have a random keystone. This is any of the really large nodes on the passive tree that generally have 1 upside and 1 downside. Now, I've called out Crimson Dance here as one to look for because this has no drawback. Unless you are playing a character that inflicts bleed, the drawback on this has no impact on your character at all, and therefore I quite like Crimson Dance as an option. Contrast this to something like Blood Magic that usually ruins the item, or Ancestral Bond which usually ruins the item, or a number of other keystones that can be really deleterious if your character isn't built around them, things like Resolute Technique. You don't want to look for those ones, you want to look for the ones that have no meaningful drawback for your build. Maybe make a list of 3 keystones that won't hurt your build if you get them, and then have a look to see if you can find your perfect set of colors in Skin of the Lords. One last thing that does need to be said about this item, as a little bit of a warning, this does not play well with leveling your own Awakened Gems. broadly speaking, you don't want to socket gems in this that are not max level. Anyways, that's all I got for this. May your Varlorps have interesting results, and I will see you around.